Reddit. Has anyone here actually killed another human being? What was it like? Serious. I work for the railroad. I've killed 3 people in my 12 years on the rail. 2 were suicides. That didn't really bother me. The one that really got me though was hitting a family at a crossing right before Christmas. The roads were icy and they couldn't get stopped in time. My train hit the car dead center on the passenger side, killing the mother instantly. It spun them around and flipped the car off the tracks. The 2 kids and the dad walked away with minor injuries. I was an engineer for over 30 years, hit 13 cars, but never killed anyone in a car. I did run over a guy who committed suicide. He laid his head on the rail. We were going 60 miles per hour. Could not stop. 14 years ago I, 12 years old, was riding a bike in the park with friends. A buddy of mine challenged me to a game of chicken. We were to ride directly towards the street, and first to chicken out and not cross lost. As I was approaching the street I slammed the brakes before the curb and a car was coming around the bend who swerved because he thought I was going into the street. It was an old man who hit a pole and was severely injured. The car was about to catch fire so my friend and I removed him from the vehicle. He told the cops it wasn't my fault, that he swerved because he thought I was going to cross the street but that I was stopped. The man died the next day in the hospital. It still shakes me up a bit to realize I caused that because of a stupid game with a friend. I never rode a bike again until last year. A few years ago I was driving home from work in a snowstorm. The trip from work to home was about 54 kms. It was about 1030 pm. And probably about -40 with the wind. A man stepped out onto the road in front of me. He was outside my headlight range but I managed to catch the glint of something. Years of driving that road I learned to react quickly to little things. Deer or other animals' eyes reflect light. I managed to skid and slid to a stop only lightly bumping him as he didn't move. He got into the car, smelling strongly of booze and through the slurs he told me THST he needed to get to Lloydminster, a city about an hour's drive from my location. I told him I wasn't driving to the city but I would drop him off at the bar motel in the little town I lived close by called Chauvin. I did and along the way he told me he needed to see his daughter and it couldn't wait. No idea why but he was clearly drunk and freezing so I just agreed. I left him at a bar which he went into and drove home. Several days later I learned that he had gone back out shortly after and froze to death on the side of the road. He was trying to get to the city to see his daughter in the hospital. She died the day he did. It wasn't really my fault but I feel like I should have at least talked to the people in the bar before I went home. I just wanted to get home as soon as possible cause the weather was getting worse. I'm a respiratory therapist. We are the ones who take people off of life support. It's not for everyone. I indirectly killed my mom. To shorten it, when I was 11 my mom became sick and it led to her being bedridden. I was the only one to take care of her and I did. I walked to the grocery, helped her to the bathroom and helped her with everything. I would wake up, make her and I breakfast, make her a lunch and store some drinks in a cooler next to her bed, go to school, come straight home and help her to the bathroom, make dinner, homework, rinse, repeat. This went on until I was 18. At the time we were living in my dad's extra house but his new wife didn't like his ex-wife living in a home of his so he was evicting us. I took my mom to the doctor and he basically told her she'd be like this for the rest of her life and would need someone to take care of her. The next week my grandma, my dad's mom, had a stroke and was in the hospital. My dad called me and I was getting my mom ready to go see her and my dad told me not to bring her, that Hannah, name changed, doesn't want my mom there. This broke my mom's heart. She knew my grandma for 40 plus years. She was crying and yelling and I was crying and stressed because of college, my grandma, my mom, my dad, everyone. So I yelled at my mom. I don't remember what I said exactly but I remember yelling just get over it and I left for the hospital. I came back a few hours later and found my mom in her room. She had shot herself. Just like that my whole world and life I had known was gone. Not a day goes by that I don't blame myself for being the final nail in my mom's coffin. The only thing to make it all worse was a cleanup crew was too expensive so I cleaned up the aftermath on my own. Nobody expects to be 18 and cleaning parts of their mom's brain off their bed. I ran over someone with my car. I was with my family going Christmas shopping when I was 16. I was driving. We were on the interstate in a pretty high traffic area. I remember seeing someone fall from the car next to us. I'll never forget the thud the car made as we hit another person at 70+ mph. As it turns out, he had actually stepped in front of another car and they knocked him into my lane. Not that it really makes a difference, but he was probably already gone before I hit him. Not the ideal Christmas shopping experience. That's too heavy for a 16-year-old. I'm sorry that happened to you. Although it's not murder, I didn't return my best friend's call the night he overdosed and died. Sometimes I feel if I answered and we hung out, I could have prevented the chain of events that occurred. Sadly, addiction is a powerful entity. Not sure if you're counting war. At the time when it happened I was overcome with mixed emotions. I was happy because I was part of the club. The first group of people my team killed were an Iraqi mortar team and they were actively shelling the base I lived on, which was the same base my brother was on, so the incentive to kill them was absolutely present. It didn't really start to process until maybe 5 months later. I started to sit around smoking my hookah and thinking about that day, remembering what they looked like when I was staring down at their contorted faces with their brains hanging out, holes in their neck, dried blood everywhere. Then thinking of what they looked like on their pictures. It was very hard for me to process because we had lost so many people. I felt split between satisfaction in knowing I put a huge dent in their manpower and ability to attack us. But at the same time I kept thinking about how everyone there came from a family, had a mother and was at one point a helpless child who just wanted to live and find its place in the world. I had just had my first son while I was deployed, if you can't tell by all the emotion-y stuff. During this time in my life I was also absolutely convinced I was going to die there, so I spent every downtime I had sitting around contemplating what it will be like when I'm no longer self-aware because I don't exist, what it will be like to not know I'm here, have no emotions, just gone. The thought that I scratched someone off from existence into oblivion is the hardest part. Dead on. At some point everyone was innocent. Circumstances put them on the wrong side of a hopeless conflict, but it is hard to not see them in the end as just people. Hardest part for me is to visualize those guys having kids who think their dad is invincible. When he doesn't come home it shatters that illusion. I really just have to get this off my chest. Don't really have anyone to talk to this about. This August I was involved in a car accident where a pedestrian ran out in front of my car and died. It is honestly one of the most devastating things that has happened to me. There are things about that night that I will never forget, like the sound of my car impacting with him, or just all the glass that was everywhere. I will forever remember that man's name and that on the 8th of August at 9:29 p.m. I killed him. The worst part about it is the first time you remember every day that you were responsible for another person's death, your heart just sinks down into your stomach. People try and tell me that it was not my fault and I did everything I could, but that doesn't help me at all. All I think about is if I wasn't driving he would still be alive. I'm also really paranoid about people crossing the street not at a crosswalk. Every time I see it I have like a little mini panic attack inside my brain. So yeah, basically it sucks. It sucks a lot, and it's something that you will never forget. My cousin killed herself a few years ago by stepping out in front of a car on the highway, and it may sound weird but I can't help but think about where the girl that hit her is now and how they were affected by it. It always makes me think about how one day can change your entire life. Mine was through decision, but I felt as though I had personally done the deed. Freshman year of college, a bunch of friends and I had planned on going out camping for Memorial Day weekend. At the last minute, I changed the plans on us to go swimming and staying at my family's lake house instead, because beds and TV and stuff. First night and it in the water, we decided to swim out to the middle of the lake and just tread water and laugh and splash around. After a while we all swam back to the dock and I was second to last in front of Tommy. Tommy never got out. I dove back in but couldn't find him anywhere. We had no phone in the cabin, so after I ran back up the hill I ran barefoot down the gravel road to the main road, then to the nearest neighbor's house hysterical. They called the police and then at the end divers found him about 12 feet from the end of the dock. I blamed myself horribly for the change of our plans. I sat through the funeral numbly while his parents lied to me about how much he looked forward for weeks to the swimming trip. I stopped going to my honors classes and drank and smoked myself into an opium stupor for the rest of the semester and failed out of college. I kept abusing myself for 2 years until I finally got myself some help with my depression over it. I was 13 and home alone with my little sister and heard glass breaking at the back door, then the knob rattling, then the door squeaking. I got my sister and we ran into my dad's office. I grabbed his rifle from the shelf and told her to hide under the desk. I stood in front of her and aimed the gun at the hallway. I heard footsteps coming this way and a man I didn't recognize came around the corner. I pulled the trigger and everything that happened next is still a blur. Apparently I kept shooting until the magazine was empty, hitting the intruder 22 times. He had multiple warrants out for his arrest for drugs, beating his girlfriend, and a string of convenience store robberies. I lost a lot of sleep worrying it would happen again, and I still go into panic mode if I hear a suspicious noise. I absolutely cannot relax or go back to sleep until I search the house. You may have saved your little sister and even yourself. Who knows how fricked in the head that guy was. When I was in 3rd grade, my next door neighbor came to pick me up from school because my grandmother couldn't make it in time to pick me up. While we were heading to the car, I stepped in front of him and a strap from the back of my book bag, it was a rolling one, tripped him up and he broke his knee. He had to go to the hospital to get surgery and the doctors ended up using an anesthetic that he was allergic to and passed away. His wife very clearly told doctors not to use this certain anesthetic but they went ahead anyways. After his death she became very depressed and died a few years later due to cancer. She wouldn't leave the house and I feel like I caused both of their deaths. They were such good people and I know they really cared for me. Also his wife could have sued the doctors but she decided not to because she didn't want to ruin the doctor's career. Doctors and cancer's fault, not yours. You broke his knee by a completely understandable and forgivable accident. The doctor killed him by being stubborn and careless. My wife was 8 months pregnant and she felt like she couldn't breathe. So we go to the hospital and her blood pressure is through the roof. The doctors say that our baby's vitals aren't doing good and we need to do an emergency C-section. So as she is prepping for the surgery, the doctor says we have a better chance to save the baby if we give her medication and wait to do the surgery to give the medication time to work on the baby. The downside is that my wife's heart function was at 20% at this point and if we postponed the surgery for any amount of time her chance of surviving the surgery dropped. So the doctor asked what we wanted. My wife looked at me and I could see she was terrified. So without hesitation and tears in my eyes I said save my wife. This was the easiest and hardest decision of my life. I would have done the same exact thing. When my wife went in for her C-section I was hysterical. I just wanted to see her. I'd never been more scared in my entire life. I'm sorry you never got to meet your daughter. I'm grateful you get to have your wife. I was 18 years old and had just received my driver's license fairly recently, so I was looking for any excuse to drive. So I jumped on the opportunity to run out and get cat food from the store even if it was 11 PM. Where my parents lived it was out in the country so there weren't many street lights so you relied on your headlights. I was coming home and was doing 60 in a 55 and coming over a little hill when suddenly in front of me I see a guy standing in the lane in all dark clothes just looking at me. I didn't have time to react and I hit him head on. He rolled off the van and I lost control. I think because the airbag deployed or because maybe I had jerked the steering wheel and went off into the woods on the left side and rolled down a hill taking out trees and everything. The van did its job luckily and protected me from dying but I got really banged up, cut up, and a mild concussion. I lost consciousness for a moment and when I came to I was at the bottom of this little hill and had to climb on all fours up the hill. I flagged down the first car I saw and luckily they stopped and called 911. Unfortunately the guy died on scene and no one could figure out why he was standing in the street. I was of course hysterical and felt so guilty. It took me a long time to even want to get behind the wheel again and even longer to want to drive at night. It was a process of fighting through it for me. I had some PTSD from the incident and would have the dream over and over again where I would see him for the split second and would wake up terrified. It was so close to my parents' house that I had to drive by it every day and would get chills. Even going back to visit them I see the scene and get chills. When I did finally drive at night, I would be overly cautious and would sometimes see something in the road and would freak out. 11 years later I am over the trauma and can drive just fine, but I still remember it. Honestly, it sounds like he was trying to commit suicide. A really crappy way to do it, by dragging someone innocent into it, but definitely sounds like suicide to me. My dad. He had leukemia and was in an induced coma, and his organs were starting to fail and get infected, and I just couldn't see him like that. He wouldn't have wanted it. I know he didn't. I had to sign a document where the last line literally said if the machines are turned off he will die, and I accept this responsibility. I signed it. I had to. Couldn't bear to see him suffering. Love you, Dad. Miss you. I did in self-defense when I was 13. This guy RP'd me and I think he was going to try to kill me, and I ended up stabbing him. There was a whole trial and whatnot. I felt bad that he died, but I don't feel bad for defending myself. Just think, you killing him could have saved many other women from going through what you did. My son had just been born a few days before and I had taken some time off of work to be at home. We'd gotten some snow that I didn't bother to clear and I didn't even check the mail. Just hung around the house enjoying life as a new parent with my wife and our baby. At about 3 AM, my son woke up. I had just finished changing his diaper and my wife was feeding him when I heard someone pry the back door open. The police said that he probably assumed the house was empty because of the snow and the drive and a few days of mail in the box. I loaded my handgun and waited near the top of our stairs in the dark, hoping that he would just steal the TV or something from the first floor and leave. He didn't. When he got halfway up the stairs, I turned on the light mounted on my gun and yelled at him to leave. He must have thought that I was just holding a flashlight, because he looked right at me and climbed up 2 more steps. All I remember seeing was the pry bar he used to get through the door in his hand. The thought of what he might do with it to my wife and child terrified me. I shot him twice square in the chest and I'll never forget the look on his face. It was like he was surprised at first, then horror when he looked down and saw the bleeding. I remember taking the first shot and thinking that I missed because he just froze there. After the second was when I could clearly see the bleeding. It can't have been more than a second between the two, but it felt like forever. He tried to run away, but only got a few steps before he fell down and, I assume, went into shock. That man pleaded for help and begged me not to kill him. I remember sitting on the top step with the gun still aimed at him and just sat there shaking and watched a man bleed out halfway down my staircase. I have no idea how long he lived. It felt like hours, but my wife tells me that the police were at our house in 10 minutes. The police said that there had been several burglaries in our town recently and that I did the right thing. I grew up hunting and target shooting for fun, but never expected to shoot a person. I kinda feel bad that I don't have any guilt about it, but every time I think about that night, I instantly switch from thinking about the guy who invaded my home to being glad that my family wasn't hurt. The worst part is that now any little noise at night has it's both awake. I've had an alarm installed and got a dog, but still have trouble sleeping. This is the doggo of good health. It only appears once in 1.232 millennium. Subscribe to AskReddit in 14 seconds and you'll have good cholesterol again. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.